Hey guys. Okay, so I just wanted to do a separate recording on the jury. I had mentioned the jury the first day of trial, first day of the actual trial. So that would have been, I guess, like day 4. I mentioned the jury. Mentioned the jury makeup from a racial and age standpoint. And I did, throughout the course of the trial, mention some of the concerns that I had of not only the demographic makeup, but of some of the behaviors that I noticed throughout the entire. So the trial itself was, the trial, including opening arguments, closing arguments, and the verdict, was a total of 11 days. I went 10 of the 11 days. I only missed one day, and that was during Jabari's, if I'm not mistaken, 3rd day of testimony. That whole day was dedicated to that, and that was the day that I missed. But it's of no consequence in terms of what this stream is about. So just to get started, the jury makeup from a racial and age standpoint, maybe even occupational standpoint. I don't know the occupations of any of them. I was told that one of them was a nurse, which again is of no real consequence, because even if she was an ER nurse, she wouldn't necessarily know the same things that the expert ER doctors testified to during the trial. The rest of them just look like regular, working class people, white collar or blue collar, again, of no real consequence. So we had the 4-person, that's juror number 1. She was of Hispanic origin. Don't know the nationality, but she was Hispanic. Lighter complected Hispanic. That does matter from a, let's say, cultural standpoint, because anybody that's a New Yorker knows that, unfortunately, colorism is a thing within not only the Black community, but different Hispanic nationalities. So she is a white appearing Hispanic woman, but you can tell that she is Hispanic. You would not see her and say, oh, that's a white woman. That's the jury 4-person. That was juror number 1. Juror number 2 was a Black, African-American Black woman. Okay, back to juror number 1. Juror number 1 looked like she was in her mid to late 30s, white appearing Hispanic woman. Juror number 2, Black woman, appears to be in her mid to late 50s. Juror number 3 was what I initially thought, and it could still be correct, middle-aged, again, late 40s, early 50s, early to mid 50s. He appeared Hispanic on first glance, but after about 6 or 7 of the 11 days of the trial, he gave me more of a darker Southern Italian vibe. So I'm going to probably stick closer to, he's probably Italian, of Southern Italian descent, maybe Sicilian, something along those lines, but he definitely had a darker complexion. On first glance, you could mistake him for Hispanic, but I'm quietly confident that he's probably more Italian, or maybe a mix of both. Maybe one parent was Hispanic, one was Italian. I don't know. Juror number 3, wait, 1, 2, 3. Juror number 4, white male, looked to be in his late 20s, very early 30s. He presented as a little older because he did have a comb over, but he also had facial acne and glasses. So that's why I'm giving him probably late 20s, more than even early 30s. He every day came in a suit. Everyone else dressed normally, dressed kind of like how I'm dressed now. But he was only one, remarkably, that came every day, shirt, tie, suit jacket, or some type of corporate type of clothing. You get up in the top row, we had alternate juror. She initially, I thought she was white, but she does appear to be of some ethnic group of maybe Middle Eastern, maybe Hispanic. I said Mediterranean, could be Greek, darker complected, middle-aged woman, probably in her 40s. late 40s to early 50s. Next to her was a biracial Asian. He also was an alternate. He looked like he might have been Asian and white. And then next to him was another Asian guy who looked to be in his 20s, and he behaved like he was in his 20s. I'll get to that later. He probably Korean, somewhere along those lines, but he was, full of whatever he was. And then next to him was a Caucasian woman. She was the only fully, I can clearly see she was a Caucasian woman. She was LGBT. That matters because, again, from a social perspective, the outlook is a little different when it comes to heterosexual relationships and when it comes to what I call agenda items as they relate to how the thought process might be in terms of, well, what women are capable of or what we give allowances to for women to do when we, when we are fully pro-woman, right? So the 6 deliberators were the Italian-looking man, the jury 4-person, obviously, the Hispanic woman, the Black woman, the white LGBT woman, and the Asian man. So there were 6 jurors, 2 alternates, 8 total that sat throughout the entire trial. I did not do a whole lot of looking at the jury, except for that first time that I just wanted to kind of get what the demographics were, mainly because, I was sitting on the side of Jonathan's family and friends, and then, some other reporters that were clearly pro-Jonathan. And so I did not want them to catch me looking at them and think that I was, trying to intimidate them or, whatever. So I just kind of would glance here and there every now and again. But the few times that I did glance, I did notice some things that bothered me. Juror number 3, which is the Italian Hispanic looking man, he did a lot of gesturing, a lot of nodding, a lot of, looking. He had a lot going on, and I found it a little weird because I thought, I could be wrong, but I thought that jurors were supposed to be less reactive and less expressive, just the same way the judge tells us not to show any emotion or make any gestures. I feel like the rules usually apply the same to them because, again, you don't want either side to think that you are not being impartial until all the evidence is presented, which is what the judge made sure that he said every day. You are not to consider or come up with a verdict, even if it's to yourself, until all the evidence is presented. So by reacting or showing approval or disapproval of certain things that are being said, that can give the impression that, you have already made your decision, But again, that can work in Jonathan's favor if it's brought up and if it was noticed. And I will get to that later as well. So that was juror number 3. That's the Hispanic / Italian looking man. Juror number 2, who I thought was going to be our saving grace, or at least the holdout. And I think that initially she might have been at one point, but I think she buckled under the pressure of either just wanting to go home or being outnumbered and potentially being singled out for what I will get to in a minute. She probably just was like, you know what, I'm done. It's kind of like when you're an employee and you get a bad review, a bad performance review, you kind of check out and you start looking for another job because it's kind of like you feel like you can't redeem yourself after that no matter what. And in corporate, it's usually like that. The minute you get a performance review that's not, typical or not average or above average, you're in the crosshairs at that point. So you may as well just move on. And I don't know if that's maybe what she started feeling when it was brought to the attention of the judge, what I will mention later. And she just wanted to go. I don't know. I did notice that. So let's get to the behaviors. Okay, so juror number 4, which is the guy that always had on a suit, tie, some variation thereof, he seemed really enamored with not only the complainant, but the female ADA, almost goo-goo-eyed, you know, oh, you know, like, oh my, they're so pretty. Totally get it, because he fits that profile. That bothered me. It even bothered someone that stood in for me, Jimmy. Hey, Jimmy, who stood in for me on Thursday when I couldn't make it, the first Thursday of the first week of trial. That bothered me because right then I knew, okay, so they got him, if nobody else. Like I said, juror number 3, a lot of nodding, a lot of, you know, that kind of thing going on bothered me, because I was like, okay, so now we have 2 that might be problematic in the jury room when it comes to being anti-defense. Juror number 2, who is a Black woman, she made it very clear that she was pro-defense. Whenever prosecution witnesses came on, she kind of checked out. And again, that bothered me as well, because even though I could sense that I already knew that she was going to be pro-Jonathan, you're not supposed to show it. You know, you're not supposed to be so obvious that it got to a point where the prosecution expressed concerns about her because she fell asleep a couple of times. One of the times being during the prosecution witness's testimony about was about a whole lot of nothing, but her initial intent was to eventually get to why Jabari would consistently chase after, call, remain in the home of, beg to come home, someone that she was supposedly afraid of and that was supposedly abusing her over the course of 18 months. We never got to that, but that was her initial purpose for being there. She bored us all to tears. I even fell asleep a couple of times. I had to catch myself because I'm a very spiritual person, and I would here and there stop and pray. And I would close my eyes. I would put my head down, close my eyes, say a prayer. I did that several times during the trial. And all jokes aside, I closed my eyes one time during this woman's testimony, and my eyes didn't open back. And I had to wake myself up. I was like, oh, wait a minute, my bad. It was that boring. And I totally get it. I said it before, and I liken it to when I was an undergrad and I was working full time. I at one point went to school after work. So you're talking a class that ran from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m., 6 p.m. to 10 p.m., and it's not the most interesting class, and you're nodding off during the class. That's literally how I felt. It felt as though on direct, it felt as though you were in a psychology 101 class and that's not your area of interest, and you're just going through the motions because it's a requirement towards your degree. It's not your degree, but it's a requirement towards your degree. So you're just taking the class because you have to. And that's how it felt. And the juror number 2 did fall asleep during that. And I noticed it, and I was like, oh no. Oh no. She fell asleep a couple of times prior to that, but it was really obvious that day because, again, it was so quiet in the courtroom. There was no movement, almost like everybody fell asleep. Even if they were awake, they just zoned out. So it was so quiet in the courtroom that you could hear and see almost everything. And I thought, and that was my opportunity to look, because I was like, oh, good, they're not really paying attention. So let me go look and see what the jury's doing. And lo and behold, she was like this, sleeping. And at first I thought she might have been praying, because they were not allowed to take notes. So I was like, there's no way she's taking notes. She's sleeping. And of course, the prosecution did bring that up. I don't think it was the next day. I feel like it was a couple of days later where the prosecution brought that up while we were waiting, because she and another juror was running late one morning and we had to wait. So while we were waiting, the prosecution brought up their concerns with juror number 2. And from what I understand from another content creator, Lauren Burke, she said that she saw where they had gone back into chambers and discussed it. Shout out to Lauren. Hey, girl. So I don't know if they did that because they thought at that point that they were possibly going to end up losing the case. And by all accounts, I feel like they did, because they stuck him with 4 charges. He only got convicted of the 2 very, very low grade ones, one of which is not even a crime, it's not even considered, how do I put it, for lack of a better way to put it, he only really got 1 official conviction, let's put it that way. And that was the assault charge that they got him on, the 3rd degree recklessly causing physical injury charge. The harassment in the 2nd degree, that's literally like, if you didn't take it to court, if it wasn't a jury trial, that's literally like a ticket, a citation. So to me, the prosecution lost, but of course they're going to take it as a win because he didn't get off 100%. But I said all that to say that I think that that's why they brought it up as a concern, so that if they lost and Jonathan won, they could say, oh, well, that juror was falling asleep, so it's a mistrial, or, something along those lines. I don't know why after I get to the 2nd row of jurors, I can't get the numbers straight, but the primary juror that was in the original 6 that deliberated, the younger Asian guy that I said that appeared to be, I honestly feel like he wasn't even 30 yet, looked very young, acted even younger. Everything was funny to him. Every time somebody said objection, usually the prosecution, every time the prosecution said objection and it was sustained, he's giggling. They're watching the videos on playback. He's giggling. He's laughing. Something's always funny. I'm like, what's funny? I don't know if it's nervous laughter. I really don't know. But it doesn't matter. You're here taking a job as a civil servant that's serious in nature. This is someone's future at stake. You're too old to be laughing at someone saying objection. That's not funny. That's something that a kid in junior high school would do when you're in biology and you're learning about the anatomy of boys versus girls. And, they teach that part in biology and everybody's in the corner snickering. That's literally how it felt to me. And I'm using that example because I am an educator as well. And I do educate immature teenagers. So it definitely reminded me of that uncomfortable topic that's being discussed, and everybody, instead of just being mature about it and listening to it and taking notes and doing what you have to do to get the information and be able to do your assignments, you're giggling. You're nudging your neighbor and laughing about it, that type of thing. I did also notice with jurors 1, 2, and 3, not every day, but here and there, they would kind of be talking to one another. And I'm like, are you supposed to be doing that? Or laughing, or basically not keeping their poker faces on, or you know, kind of maybe mumbling something, and then the other person would kind of laugh at it, or you know, that kind of thing, gesturing, things like that. Again, like I said, I've never been a juror. I've lived in 3 different states. I'm born and raised in New York. I've lived in Atlanta, the Atlanta metro, and I lived in one of the smallest counties in Atlanta, Rockdale County, which only has 1 city, which is Conyers, and never got called. Never got called. And I was there for 8 years. I lived in Conyers, Georgia for 8 years. Never got called for jury duty. I lived in Tampa, Florida for a cumulative, oh my Lord, cumulative, okay, I can't say it. But I've lived, my first stint was 3 years, current stint going on 10 years. So let's say 13 years total I've lived in Tampa. Got called 1 time, 6 years ago, for a feral cat neighbor dispute case that I didn't get picked for because I told them I had a legal background, I guess. I don't know. They picked the person that made sure everybody knew that she could not stand law enforcement. She could not stand the judicial system. But they picked her. So I said that to say and to segue into this article that I want you guys to take a look at. I'm going to share my screen so that you can see this article. It was published in 2017. Not too old, but it speaks volumes, because I've said it before, and I've actually done some work with CNN on this topic, with the jury selection and things like that. And it definitely bothered me. It bothers me still. Hold on, let me clear this because my whole screen is going crazy. All right, so this particular New York Times article. All right, so this is the image that you'll see when you pull the article up, just so you know you're at the right place. But look at the title of this article. Let me get rid of this paywall. All right, so this is the article. The article says, in juries, lawyers now favor the uninformed. I've said that before. I've been told that. There's actually a, in my playlist under my YouTube profile, I posted some of the work that I did on HLN After Dark over a decade ago. I got out of that. I got out of that business about 10 years ago, but I figured when I started this channel solely for the purpose of supporting Jonathan Majors at this point, I found the clip of one of the attorneys, Holly, she's another friend of mine. We basically pretended to be a jury, and they were pretending to do a jury voir dire where they had to eliminate certain jurors from the jury pool. This was during the George Zimmerman trial. We were participating in the coverage of the George Zimmerman trial. And if you go to the 19-minute, 8-second mark of that video, actually, I might just play that for you guys. You see where she says that she's eliminating me because I'm too smart. I know too much. And that's funny because that was 10 years ago. Fast forward now to 4 years after that fact, and this article was published about lawyers now favoring the uninformed. And this is no offense to anyone that has ever served jury duty. Like I said, I lived in New York until I was about in my late 20s. Never served, never got called. Moved to Florida for 3 years, never served, never got called. Lived in Atlanta area for 8, never served, never got called. Back here almost 10 years, never got called 1 time, never served. So it's not like they necessarily know who I am. I mean, I guess they do now from 5, 6 years ago when I got called and didn't get picked. But it's unfortunate. But if there's a jury of 12 people, at least half of them are these uninformed people that lawyers like to pick. Now, we're not talking uninformed in terms of not knowing about the case, because obviously that is a basic fundamental necessity, that you don't know anything about the case, or you don't know a lot about the case, because obviously if you do, you're going to be biased. You already have an opinion, right? So that's a basic fundamental requirement, is that you don't know anything about the case at hand or whatever the topic at hand is. So, for example, when I got called to potentially be a juror on this feral cat neighbor dispute type situation, you know, they ask you if you're a pet owner. You know, they ask you, you know, things like, do you like cats, or have you ever had a cat? You know, things like that. So obviously, if you're a cat lover, they don't want you on that jury, because the whole point is this neighbor is suing her other, you know, the other neighbor, because she has 30 cats that are all over her property and you know, causing issues. So you have to obviously meet a very basic fundamental lack of knowledge in order to get chosen for certain juries. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about literally not knowing anything about anything, basically being, you know, whether it be apathetic or just not involved in anything. You just don't stand for anything. You don't have any, you're indifferent about things. You know, those people that you can't ask an opinion because they'll just straddle the fence. Those type of people are typically definitely what prosecution wants, you know, because those are not your threatening people. Those are not your people that are going to give trouble on a jury. Those are not the people that are going to potentially cause a hung jury. Those are not the people that are going to make people think, you know, and prosecution love those juries, because those are the ones that are easy to confuse. Those are the ones that are easy to manipulate with 1,000 pieces of evidence. You just throw this one red herring in front of them, and they're like the T-Rex in Jurassic Park. You know, you just throw the flare, and they'll go from focusing on eating you to where the flare went. You know, those are the kind of juries that they like. And I'm putting this out there to say, not only do I want more of us, more of people of color, to stop dodging jury duty. Please stop doing that. I know back in our parents' days, you didn't get paid if you served, you know, you would get paid by the courts, but your job didn't have to pay you if you went on jury duty. Now they can't do that. So not only will you get paid from your job and not have to dip into your PTO time, the courts have to pay you as well. So there's really no excuse to not serve on a jury. Please. We've had so many situations, namely in killer cop cases, where the grand jury did not even indict because it was not representative of us. You know, cops are killing us and they're not even getting indicted because the grand jury is white like them or feel the way they do about us. You know, now had we been on that grand jury, they would have gotten indicted, you know, and then let's say they do get indicted. Now the actual jury that has to convict them of the actual crime they're being charged with. A lot of times those juries don't look like us. This jury did not look like Jonathan. It did not. The only thing that could have possibly looked like him was the one black woman and maybe one or two of the jurors that was in his age group. 32, 34, 36. That's it. There were no black men on the jury. The one black man that could have possibly made the jury selection was an NYU MBA student, graduate, that they said they did not want on a jury because they didn't think he could understand jury instructions. A master's in business administration graduate from New York University, a baby Ivy League level school, could not understand jury instructions. A black man that could have been the person that would have either hung the jury or forced that jury to sit there a little longer to get him one less conviction. Think about that. So we have to stop. We have to stop judge and jury duty, because this was, everything else aside, the celebrity aside, the fact that we like his work aside, the fact that some of us are actual fans of him as a person and his work, put all that aside and just think about your sons, your husbands, your fathers, your brothers, your best friends, your boyfriends. This could be them. Something as simple as exercising their legal right to retrieve their phone from somebody who admittedly was the aggressor in the entire situation can lead you into a jury trial where you're getting convicted of essentially accidentally hurting someone in the process of legally retrieving your personal property. And now your whole life's ruined. I don't think Jonathan's life is ruined, because he's not, an everyday, lay person. But if you're an everyday lay person with that on your record, you're probably not going to get another job for the next 7 to 10 years, because most employers, or a good job for the next 7 to 10 years, because most employers, when they do the background checks, they check between the last 7 and 10 years. So you're going to have to wait that out. Pray that the current job you have doesn't fire you if they find out about it. And then you have to stay at that job for at least another 7 to 10 years before you can look for another job. Or if you do end up getting fired as a result of the incident, now you're not going to be able to find any other comparable job with comparable income for another 7 to 10 years. Think about that. And this goes for both men and women. You can be a woman dealing with the same situation. Your boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, snatch something personal to you. You try to get it back. They get accidentally injured, allegedly injured, because again, that's up for debate whether she was even injured at that time. Allegedly injured. They decide to involve the police. However that comes to be, the police gets involved. Now you're in court with a jury and your future's in the balance, because not only are you spending 2 weeks in trial and not at work, so more than likely you will lose your job. If you get convicted of any of the charges, who's going to hire you? Because just like how society is viewing these very low-grade convictions as the end of the world, imagine what your local corporate job or wherever you work, imagine how they look at it. Because they're not going to sit there and try to figure it out. They're not going to ask you, well, what exactly happened? Do you have video to prove that you didn't really hurt this person? They don't care about that. They just see a conviction, that it's recent, and that we don't want this person here, and that it's related to some type of violent encounter. We don't want this person here. Surely you're not going to be anybody's teacher. Anything involving children, you are not going to get a job doing. And if you had the job, you're going to lose it. You're going to lose your license and everything else. So, this is way bigger than, the obvious. I'm obviously here for Jonathan Majors, the situation. But for those who aren't fans or can't relate, or like, okay, whatever, he's a celebrity, he'll be okay. Put yourself in these shoes, because again, this is an everyday occurrence. When I say everyday occurrence, I don't mean that it's happening every day. I mean, this is just something that can happen to any of us. This could happen to me right this minute. Somebody can come into my office right now, snatch my phone. I can get up, try to get my phone, accidentally, allegedly hurt them in the process, and my entire life could be hanging in the balance if the cops get involved. Okay. So this was about the jury. This was about my, impression of them, and also to implore you guys to please serve jury duty if you ever get called. Your job cannot not pay you. They cannot force you to use your PTO time to go to the jury duty. And as a bonus, you get your little $30, $40 a day from the court system and free lunch. Look at it that way. And you're serving you're serving the public as your civic duty to the public, and potentially saving someone's life, especially if they look like you and that whatever the situation is that they're being tried for is something that it's just ridiculous and something that shouldn't even be happening. This is your time to shine, because I say I'm also a social justice person, and I'm very aware of racial issues in society more than most people. I'm on my Angela Davis most days, and I had 3 categories or 3 lines of work that most racists exist in. And I can say this with certainty because I've worked in all 3 in one way, shape, or form. We all know law enforcement is the main one. That's where most of the racists live, because they're on the front lines of ensuring that people of color either get wrongfully convicted or wrongfully charged, arrested, or whatever you want to call it. That's their primary function in choosing those occupations as active racists. Education is the second place where they exist in huge numbers. I've worked with many a racist teacher, and they tend to work in majority Black and brown schools because those are the only schools that I've worked in on purpose. And almost every Caucasian teacher that I've encountered was very hard on the Black students. I even had one tell me of one that decided that she wanted to campaign on disrespecting me, and needless to say, that didn't go well. But he had the nerve to tell me that she's going through a lot at home. Meanwhile, because she was Caucasian, of course, she's going through a lot at home. Meanwhile, this school is in the heart of one of the worst neighborhoods in Tampa Bay, and the majority of the students that attended that school were neighborhood kids. This girl was in the magnet program in that school. 85% of the school was from the neighborhood. One of my students got shot in the foot after school one day because they would have active shootings in the neighborhood, but she's going through a lot. Okay? These are the kind of teachers that will write your kid up for going to the bathroom one time too many, but give a pass to this child because she's going through a lot. Okay? The ones that'll keep getting your kids suspended. The ones that will maybe bump up this kid from a 78 to an 80, but leave your kid at a 78 for the same exact quality of work and effort. Okay? And then the third, hospitals. This is why we say advocate for yourself, advocate for your children, because a lot of these doctors and nurses are there to ensure that the quality of care that you get is not as high as that their peers. We've seen that time and again during the pandemic, where many nurses and doctors were getting fired for saying crazy things after the George Floyd situation. And then I added a fourth, juries. The most eager to serve jury duty are the ones that were on this Jonathan Majors jury. I failed to mention two points. The jury foreperson, she, when the court clerk was reading the charges, and they read each charge, and then the foreperson has to say guilty or not guilty. She tripped all over herself to the point where before he could even finish reading the second charge, she said guilty. Interrupted him before he could even finish reading it, and he had to stop her, finish reading it, and then she repeated guilty. So what does that tell you? She couldn't wait to say that he was guilty. And that might have been one of the charges that she was going hard on. And then the other observation was when they polled the jury, they go juror by juror, one in this case 1 through 6, asking if that was their verdict. And you know they have to say yes. And 9 times out of 10, they all say yes, even if it was a no. Juror number 2 and juror number 4 had to repeat because they mumbled it so low that they couldn't be heard. So I feel like those two were probably the hesitant ones, probably the ones that got bullied by the rest of them to come up with a verdict because, look, we want to go home. If we get a hung jury, it could be another 2 or 3 days before the judge will say, okay, go ahead. Y'all are hung. Mistrial. They wanted to go home. So this is why it's so important to not be the only one in the room. Because I really thought juror number 2 was going to hold it down. And I feel like she did. And I say that because another observation that I made was when they came back before lunch. This is the day, this was Monday that just passed. When they came back before lunch with a note asking to get the explanation of charges for charge number 4 reread, in addition to seeing the raw footage of Jonathan trying to get her back in the car and her chasing after him. And then they wanted to hear a very small part of Chloe's testimony, which was the girl that took Grace to the club that night. Very small part, asking about, reading about how Grace complained of her finger hurting and the girl getting her some ice. I noticed that everything was all good up until that part where the court stenographer had to read that small blurb in the testimony. And then I saw juror number 3, the Italian Hispanic looking guy, go like this. Like, And then juror number 2, the black woman hung her head. Like, damn. So I feel like, has she stood her ground? Because even with the testimony being read back that Grace said that her finger hurted and she asked for ice, that means nothing. Because you could have come back and said, okay, we just watched the video of her grabbing his jacket and him yanking his jacket away and running. Could she have hurt her finger during that? That doesn't mean he hurt her. That means she was grabbing his jacket and she hurt herself. But clearly, she didn't do that. And she took that little blurb from the transcript as defeat. And she hung her head down while number 3 was nodding his head like, told you. Had there been a black man on that jury or one black woman like me on that jury, they wouldn't have left. They would have never left. We would still be there today if that's what it took. But that's probably why I'll never get picked for jury duty. I hope y'all don't see this, Pasco County. But that might be because that's what they don't want. They don't want someone that critically thinks, and they don't want someone that has a strong enough personality and a strong enough presence to demand accountability from the other jurors. So on that, I'm going to leave you. I'm not going to hold you. I just wanted to put that out there. I wanted to, while I have a small platform of influence, beg you, Black Americans, Black people who are able to serve jury duty wherever they live, please go. Know your rights and go. because there's too much injustice happening to us, and it's been happening to us for a while. But with the current political climate, it's going to happen more, and we have to stop it. And the only thing that we do have control over is whether or not we go to jury duty. We can't control whether or not we'll get chosen, but the first step is going. You know, and a lot of these racist jurors that just get on the jury just so that they can be racist, they lie. They know what to say during the voir dire to get put on those juries. And then they turn right around and the same biases that the judge warns against, they use those same biases to convict us. And you can't prove it either way. But you know it's there. We're human. Everybody has biases. Even the judge said it. But he told them to put those to the side. But in reality, if you are truly racist, you're not putting that to the side. You just know how to hide it. In New York, they're notorious for knowing how to hide their racism. That's why so many people believe that they don't live in a racist society in New York. The clues, the huge clues, are the fact that blacks and Hispanics very rarely live amongst white people. Those are the huge clues. And in order to live amongst white people, you have to make a certain amount of money because you're priced out of those areas. But nobody notices that because it's been normalized. It's been normalized to be segregated within certain communities of Brooklyn, the Bronx, Manhattan, Queens. It's normalized because we look at it as, oh, well, it's immigration and, you know, people tend to migrate where they know other people. Yeah, the immigrants. But how do you explain that for the people that aren't from another country, that have been here for generations? How do you explain that? That if you're black, you can't live anywhere other than Harlem, the Bronx, South Jamaica, Red Hook, East New York. How do you explain that? Racism and the fact that you are strategically priced out of certain neighborhoods. And this is where they find these juries, those neighborhoods that you're priced out of, that they've been living for generations because they keep their homes and their families. They've been living in Howard Beach for generations. They've been living in Crown Heights for generations. So while they didn't pay $1 million for their home, you can't move in there for less than $1 million today. And they don't have to see you when they get home. Might not even have to see you during the day if they work in their neighborhoods. So they have these stereotypes and these mindsets already in place. And especially if they're over a certain age, they remember, you know, Yusef Hawkins. They remember, you know, all the different racially motivated crimes that happened against black people of the 80s and early 90s. They remember the Central Park Five and having those negative thoughts about them and how Trump said they should get the death penalty, and it turned out they weren't even guilty of the crime. Serve jury duty, people. That's my ending note. Please go to jury duty, especially in cities like New York, Boston, Chicago, LA, where corruption and racism run rampant, and people think because they are liberal cities that that's not possible. Those are the worst places. Those are the worst cities to have to stand trial in. All right, guys, that's enough for my lecture, but thank you for joining me, and I will see you guys next time.
And number 12 is so smart, and she knows so much about this. Sometimes when we put people who are familiar with law and policy on the jury, they tend to criticize the lawyers' performances more than pay attention to the evidence. So that's why number 12, we don't want her being the foreperson, because whoever side she's on, she's going to be the leader of this jury if we put her on it.
You got kicked off for being too smart. Okay, that's what Holly Hughes just said to you.
No, they're all smart, but her particular area of expertise, if she takes charge of this jury and she's not on my side, I'm a goner.
You got kicked off for being too smart. How do you feel about that?
I could be kicked off for worse things.
Okay. And she said to me earlier, by the way, she's avoided jury selection all this time. She comes on this show and gets a red X. How about that?
But she needs to be doing it, doesn't she?